All right. So, let's just start out with politics. Why did you get into politics? How did it all start?
Well, it's actually a relatively simple and short story. I never thought I'd get involved in politics. I'm an accountant by education, ran a manufacturing plant for 30 years, but I got involved in my community. And so during the whole Tea Party movement, I was asked to give a speech at the Tea Party, just describing the harmful impact of government regulations on business. And never given a speech before in my life.
A true conservative seeks public office as an act of service, and only when duty calls.
What I talked about was the fact that President Obama was trying to sell his Obamacare plan, which I knew wouldn't work. I knew it wouldn't protect patients. I knew it wouldn't make care more affordable. But he was doing it by denigrating doctors. Remember saying that doctors are so greedy, basically. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
They'll take out a set of tonsils, amputate a foot to make more money.
The doctor may look at the reimbursement system and say to himself, you know what, I make a lot more money if I take this kid's tonsils out.
Now, I found that pretty offensive, and I told the audience exactly why I did, because our first child out of Carrie was born with a very serious congenital heart defect. Mm-hmm. And one of those, according to President Obama, greedy money-grubbing doctors came in at 1:30 in the morning, did a procedure on her heart, saved her life, and then 8 months later, when her heart's the size of a small plum, in 7 hours of open heart surgery, they completely rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart.
Wow.
And she literally, first week of life she spent in the hospital, and then 8 months later for that surgery, it was a week. Open heart surgery, rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart. Her heart operates backwards today, but she's 39 years old, has 2 children through surrogacy because she can't bear children. And so I basically told that story.
Yeah.
And I think a real important part of the story as it relates to COVID is it was during that time frame in 1983 that I really came to understand what the term medical practice means. Mm. It's not a clinic. It's not, it's not a business. I mean, it's literally doctors using their skill and they practice medicine. That's how we advance medicine. And so again, when I heard President Obama denigrating doctors, people that had dedicated their lives to saving lives, obviously saved my daughter's life and so many other people, it was just obnoxious. I found it incredibly offensive. So I gave that speech. Afterwards, people came up to me I didn't even know, say, hey, I liked your speech, why don't you run for office? Because I'm not crazy. I mean, but then they passed Obamacare. Right. And we're mortgaging kids' futures. So that's how I got involved in politics.
And did you go straight into the Senate? Or
yeah, I mean, this was October 2009. They passed Obamacare Christmas Eve, 2009.
Yeah.
I talked to that same person that invited me to speak at the Tea Party. She was also our county chair of the Republican Party, and I asked her to, what would you think if somebody like me decided to run for U.S. Senate? And she said, well, I'd love it. You're not crazy. Well, I proved her wrong. so literally, I didn't make the final decision to run until late April of 2010. Ran a 6-month campaign and I won 2 times.
Wow. I always found this interesting because when I started talking to politicians, first of all, it's so intimidating, right? When I first started going around talking about some of the issues from my work, looking at, vaccine safety and investigating those things, it's very intimidating to walk into a congressman's office or a senator's office and speak. And I realized fairly early on, wait a minute, this is just a person that had a regular job.
Normal folks.
A normal person that is just now in like this position of power. We really look up to them as though somehow you came from a different planet of, politicians or something. So coming in to be a senator, was it what you thought it would be?
Well, first of all, I always consider myself a citizen legislator.
Okay.
Which is really what I am. I had a full life, raised a family, and then at the age of 55, I decided to run for office and became a U.S. Senator. Listen, I knew I wouldn't be able to come here and save the world, okay? But I knew you needed people, as Jim DeMint, and actually one of the things that inspired me, I heard him on a different program saying, we need more people coming here, not to join the club, but to join the fight. Mm-hmm. So again, I still consider myself more Tea Party than Republican Party, although obviously I align with that political party. But did I really understand the full dysfunction here? No. This place is almost totally dysfunctional. What I have found out is there's basically 4 people in Washington, D.C. that have power. The president, the Speaker of the House, and then as long as we maintain the filibuster, the majority and minority leader of the Senate.
Right.
I mean, you still have some semblance of minority rights in the Senate. Of course, Democrats want to blow that up so that, if they didn't have that, there'd literally be only 3 people with power. Now, the rest of us can obviously make noise. We can hold hearings. We can utilize our position and highlight things for the public, expose things.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I came here to try and rein in deficit spending. Came here, we were $14 trillion in debt. We're now over 30. So on a bipartisan,
you had planned?
so on a bipartisan basis,
Right.
this place is very good at mortgaging our kids' future. So I became chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs in 2015. People don't realize it, but that is the Senate Oversight Committee. Governmental Affairs is, we don't really call it oversight, but it's the Senate Oversight Committee.
Okay.
And I didn't come here to do investigations, but all of a sudden you're chairman of that committee, charged with oversight over the entire federal government, and
Right.
able to conduct an investigation just about anything that you think is important. And so all of a sudden spend 6 years investigating things, and I determined really how deep the deep state is,
Yeah.
get a pretty good sense of the level of corruption in it,
Yeah.
and why I'm running again. I mean, it's got to be exposed, and there aren't a whole lot of people like myself who've been dedicated to exposing the corruption.
When you talk about Jim DeMint saying, we need, warriors, fighters in here like that really care to make a difference, not just be a part of the system. How many politicians are here with that attitude? Because from the outside, it just seems like it's just everyone scratching each other's back. They'll have a little squabble in front of cameras, but you're all going out to dinner afterwards, no matter what side you're on. How many people, what percentage would you say in this building right now?
Well, I'm not a real fan of the federal government. Okay. That said, there are a lot of good people here serving in Congress. Okay. But they're all faced with the same level of dysfunction. And, I think it's generally true that the top priority of many members, if not most, is to get reelected.
Right.
And if you have that attitude, I mean, you can rationalize it and justify it, say, I have to get reelected because, it affects your activity. From my standpoint, I'd be happy to go home.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen the dysfunction. My game plan was to serve two terms, go home. That was my wife's very strong intention.
Yeah.
And I would have done that had Biden not taken over. Democrats got total control and promised to transform America, and then proceeded to do so with open borders, 41-year high inflation, record gasoline prices, rising crime. I mean, this is the year 2022, and we don't have enough baby formula to feed our infants in the United States of America. So in the end, what we find out is the fundamental transformation is basically fundamentally destroying it. And I've never walked away from a problem in my life. And I listen, America is far too rare and precious to give up on it. So in the end, I couldn't turn my back on it.
Let's talk about the issue that, you really, created some waves around, which is, this sort of COVID crisis. Obviously, vaccines, drugs, preventatives, all these things that you got yourself in the middle with. But I remember when COVID sort of started, I started seeing these pictures of in China people falling face first. What was your first, as a politician, when did it enter into the Capitol here and become a part of the thought system, and what were those thoughts?
Well, it was late January, early February. And as we discussed earlier, I was asking you the same question. How did you get involved in all this? What was the moment? For me, I'm doing other investigations, but all of a sudden you have this weird disease, and you see the pictures in China, people wearing moon suits, which I still scratch my head and wonder was that just a scare tactic on the part of the Chinese government? I don't know. I mean,
I don't either.
There's so much that doesn't make sense about COVID that I've got a pretty open mind trying to figure out what all is pulling off here.
Yeah.
But you take something like that seriously, and obviously I think the game plan always was to scare the American public so they can gain greater control. Mm-hmm. They did a pretty good job of it. So I held my first roundtable as chairman of the committee with Scott Gottlieb, other individuals that had been connected to the CDC, and that was in early, probably about mid-February of 2020.
Okay.
That's when I first became aware of the fact that in America we really don't produce pharmaceutical drugs. We do the research on it, but all the precursor chemicals, which is called intermediate, which is kind of an odd name for it, primarily produced in China. It's a refining process. It's a dirty process, so probably not welcome type of manufacturing in the U.S. And then all the active pharmaceutical ingredients are also produced either in China or a lot of in India. So you realize we are really vulnerable.
Right.
Now, we've done nothing to correct that.
Right.
I mean, we pass $1.25 trillion infrastructure bill, and I'm trying to make the point, we ought to put something in there to nothing.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We're just going to pass another $250 billion deficit spending bill on the China bill. No mention of making sure that we're producing our pharmaceutical precursor chemicals and active pharmaceutical ingredients. I mean, this place it's not a business, trust me. This is part of the problem here is you have so very few members, staff, bureaucrats that have any experience in the private sector, which means they have very little knowledge of it and maybe worse, sympathy for it. Right. As well as the fact they've just never even participated in a functioning organization. Where you've got a company where you've got a mission statement, a vision statement, you've got annual goals. Everybody knows what. Again, you got 4 people calling all the shots here. So what are you doing today? So the level of dysfunction in Washington, D.C. is profound. It drives a guy like me nuts.
So your first conversation really was that we're obviously going to need, responses. We're going to need drugs. We're going to need things to deal with this. And so you sit down at a round table bringing, I'm sure, Gottlieb. So he's probably discussing heads of Pfizer, all these different companies, and you discover we don't make any of this stuff ourselves.
And well before I heard of Peter McCulloch's 4 pillars, prevent the spread, early treatment at home, hospital treatment, then vaccines.
Right.
Well before I ever heard that, I was immediately focusing on therapies.
Right.
Do we have drugs off the shelf? I mean, how quickly can we develop a cure for this?
Right.
So that's what I was thinking about that already in February. As things progress, I think where I probably first got made a splash on COVID is I was completely opposed to shutdowns. I mean, again, I come from the private sector. And you can't shut the American economy down. People have to eat. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can't shut it down. You're gonna have to cope with this. You're gonna have to deal with it. And so I made the comment that we tragically lose 36,000 people a year on the highways, but we don't shut the highways down.
Right.
And then that actually got brought up to Fauci in one of his press conferences in the White House, and he said, "Oh, that's beyond the pale, that analogy."
To compare traffic accidents with, that's totally way out. That's really a false equivalency.
It's like, no, it's actually a pretty accurate analogy.
Right.
So I was asked, because I made that comment, I was asked at the end of March 2020 to write the counter op-ed in USA Today. What's interesting about that is they give you 300 words, and they don't show you what their op-ed is. You just got you had a very limited number of words to write a counter to whatever they're going to publish. Right. But I was actually happy to do it because I was so utterly opposed to shutdowns. The minute I heard the possibility of a drug like hydroxychloroquine, my first thought was, if this works, can we produce enough of it? What's the volume?
Right.
Okay. But even before that, if you remember in the early days when it was obviously hitting Italy, really hitting New York, I'm seeing these doctors go online after 12, 14, 16-hour shifts. I mean, again, these people that President Obama calling greedy. Okay, these people just they're trying to practice medicine. We come back to that. They're practicing medicine. They're using their skills, trying to figure out what's happening here. And I'm seeing videos where they're saying this is different than the standard kind of lung issues we're dealing with. This is just something different. People are coming in, and they're functioning, and their oxygen levels are unbelievably low.
Right.
There's something different here. We got to try different things.
I believe we are treating the wrong disease, and I fear that this misguided treatment will lead to a tremendous amount of harm to a great number of people in a very short time.
And then those videos were being censored. I remember the video from those 2 doctors in California.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of them was Dan Erickson.
Yeah.
And they're trying to treat patients. They're saying, boy, we think a lot of people have already had this.
This thing is widespread. That's the good news.
But they were immediately shut down, immediately censored. And I'm going, how are we going to allow doctors to practice medicine if we don't utilize what we have here in the year 2020 versus what we had in 1918? We have the internet.
Right.
We've got this marvelous information age where doctors can freely exchange information. They can practice medicine. They can share their experiences. We can get on top of this. Have multiple theories of the case.
Right.
And it was all being shut down. So to get back to hydroxychloroquine, I started reaching out to the manufacturers, going, if this is going to work. Now, I've always been completely agnostic in terms of what early treatments. Just do something, okay?
Right. Better doing nothing,
So I contacted the CEO of Novartis, who's one of the major manufacturers of hydroxychloroquine. Found out they had already donated something like 30 million tablets to the national stockpile. Where are those being distributed? Well, found out there's a big log jam there. So I tried to work with the administration to break that log jam to get that distributed. Then there was a prescription log jam, as I always called it, because an emergency use authorization was written by Dr. Rick Bright, and he knew exactly what he was doing. It sounds good, right? We're going to write emergency.
That's what it sounds
yeah, but
like,
the
right.
problem is they wrote it so that you could only use hydroxychloroquine in the hospital, not for early treatment when it's too late and doctors
Right.
pushing hydroxychloroquine. We're not recommending it for the hospital. So he was asked by Secretary Azar to write an investigative drug, as there's some name for it, to get this widely available for doctors. And Rick Bright went to Buddy in the FDA, and they wrote this EUA to
Which really locked it down.
basically
instead of
tank.
opening it up. Because
That-
I remember Donald Trump basically saying, I've spoken to the FDA, I want them to make this available. So that's right about that same time.
Hydroxychloroquine. And it's shown very encouraging, very, very encouraging early results. And we're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately. And that's where the FDA has been so great. They've gone through the approval process. It's been approved.
I was hammering him all the time. I was talking to Steve Hahn. I was talking to the president. You got to break this log jam. Talk to Steve. He'll take care of it. No, I mean, Mr. President, the FDA screwed it up. They've got to unscrew it, okay? Neither one of us could get it done.
Did Donald Trump understand what had happened? I mean,
I don't think so, no.
No?
No, I don't think
Because he had seemed
I
pretty...
mean, now listen to what Dr. Birx is saying.
Right.
They
were manipulating what his requests were.
What is amazing about what Dr. Birx is, and I haven't read her book, I've read the excerpts.
Yeah.
You would think some of that information is something you'd want to take to the grave. You would never want to admit what she's admitting publicly.
Right.
So, I mean, it just shows you what a challenge we have where they believe they can talk with impunity
Right.
about lying to the President of the United States during a health crisis where we're shutting the economy down, where we are impacting people's lives, literally costing people their lives. And she's coming out saying, yeah, I was lying to the president. I was doctoring the information, the data. It's jaw-dropping. It's gobsmacking.
It seems like it's treason or sedition or something. I was like, I didn't, I don't know.
What it is,
The-
it's wrong.
It's
It was
wrong.
wrong.
That's right.
And she's bragging about it.
Right.
So again, I was dealing with those people in the White House, and it was like talking to a brick wall. Getting back to Novartis, though, so I had a pipeline to this CEO, texting him all the time, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, we got like a dozen trials that are going to be ready, mid-May to end of
So at
June."
Novartis, you felt like they were excited about this product being
Yes, because they were going to conduct like a dozen trials. These things are going to come out in May, and all of a sudden, about the end of April, I'd have to check my email or my text in terms of when the communication stopped. I've never talked to him since then.
just shut off all
It's like a
communications.
switch was turned. Boom, that was it. No more communication. I obviously never saw a trial come out of Novartis. What we did see with the fraudulent trials
Right.
on Surgisphere,
Yep.
and, so something happened there. And this is why I'm always asking you about, when did you get involved in this? At some point in time, those of us that were involved in this, we all need to sit down in a room and compare our experiences and try and put this puzzle together, because it's still a puzzle.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers. I can't explain it, but it sure seems at some point in time, the cabal, I call them the COVID cartel, decided, no, it's going to be a vaccine. And of course, that's one of the explanations of why they'd want to tank and sabotage early treatment, which they did.
Yep.
Okay, was if you have an effective therapy, you're not going to get emergency use authorization on a totally novel therapy.
Right.
That's not a vaccine. They had to change the definition of a vaccine.
Right.
So that happened somewhere around
What's
the
shocking
April.
about that? What we'll say is shocking about that is I think as we were reporting, and this is why I really was so excited to get the opportunity to talk to you, because what was happening on the inside? Because from the outside, it seemed like we were being told the drug companies, in this case Novartis, doesn't want to do anything with a generic product because they were, or at least one that's off label and is off patent and isn't going to be like highly expensive. So they buried it. But to find out that Novartis, you talk to someone inside of Novartis, they sound relatively excited. Several trials going on. It sort of changes the dynamic of what we were being told was motivating it. And in that case, it would have been finance, right? Money is what's deciding it. But this seems different than that.
Well, again, at some point, maybe the
guy you're talking to just was,
maybe
was
the corporate
off the
decision
reservation
said, okay,
for his
no,
company.
we don't want to do generic drugs anymore. We're not going to.
Right.
Again, I can't explain.
But people
it
are
made no
dying,
sense to
right?
me.
People are dying. The thing that is so shocking about this is we're being told on the news by, whatever pundit wants to go out there, whatever politician, we are working on this, people are dying, it's an emergency. Yet it felt like anything but when you start hearing what's going on. Said, aren't you going to try? I mean, you have doctors all over the world saying hydroxychloroquine's working. And so we're better off with nothing at all than something that a lot of people are seeing success
So
with?
let's set that aside for the time being.
Okay.
Let's kind of keep going down the timeline.
Okay.
Well, yeah, the Princess Cruise, where that
Yes.
entire cruise ship was infected.
Perfect petri dish study.
Which is completely held up.
Yeah.
I mean, the statistics from that, if you're elderly, you're vulnerable. You're going to have a 5, 6, 7% infection fatality rate. If you're under 70, right now I think the number is 0.05% infection fatality. A standard flu season is 0.1.
Right.
So this is half of a standard flu. But again, flu season also takes into account, it melds together the extremely elderly, whatever. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to put things in perspective. This isn't Ebola at a 40%. It's not MERS at a 30% infection fatality rate. It's not even SARS at about an 8 to 9% infection.
Correct.
This is something going to be more, maybe a really nasty flu. But again, I'm saying we can't shut down the economy. Yeah. So I held a hearing in May, and I brought in Johnny Anitas. I had Avik Roy.
How do you get a hold of it? I mean, how does a guy that's just an accountant?
I'm a U.S. senator. It's one of the advantages. You can actually talk to people.
So people told you this is your guy?
Well,
Johnny Anitas is your guy?
No, I watch the news.
Oh, so you're just seeing the statements
I'm seeing
the work
this.
he's
Yeah.
doing.
So
okay, gotcha.
So I wanted to bring him in. I brought in Avik Roy, who's kind of a healthcare expert. I brought in Scott Atlas.
Yep. So you brought in Scott Atlas before Scott Atlas went into
before
the
Scott
White House.
Yeah. I've given a fair amount of these folks some platforms here.
Yeah.
But anyway, I also heard about this guy who's affiliated with the University of Wisconsin talking about using corticosteroids. Mm-hmm. Again, here's a treatment. They're shutting all these people down. I'm going to give this guy a platform. So, I mean, last minute, and this is all Zoom. This is obviously during COVID, so this is all a Zoom hearing. But I had Pierre Corey come in. And one thing about Pierre, I tell all the witnesses, you got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Pierre doesn't worry about the 5 minute. But again, he's obviously passionate. He's talking about corticosteroids.
All societies from the beginning of COVID have advised against the use of corticosteroids in COVID-19. We think that is a fatal and tragic flaw.
I think he was pretty well vilified for quite a few weeks, even recommending corticosteroids. About 8 weeks later, you had the study about dexamethasone.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it becomes a standard of care. Mm-hmm. So in May, I'm trying to put it in perspective in terms of what the infection fatality rate is going to be. Let's not freak out about this. Let's put this in perspective, okay? Let's not have the cure worse than the disease.
Right.
And I'm putting first doctor talking about a kind of treatment. And again, I had a great deal of sympathy for all these doctors trying to get the message out, and they're all being censored. But anyway, the main purpose of the hearing is for the public to hear it.
Okay.
To hopefully get some journalists listening in and then writing a news story about it. I mean, that's how you disseminate this information. I don't expect the general public to really listen to hearings. It's kind of the aftermath and what news reports are written about it. Again, from my standpoint, we were making news, but again, I wasn't Fauci. I wasn't Birx. They had a different narrative here. And so I realized I wasn't making a whole lot of headway, and this was kind of out of my control at this point in time. And quite honestly, I wanted to make sure that President Trump got reelected, and I didn't want to get too overly critical on his administration, to be quite honest.
Because it was his administration while all this stuff was.
Yeah, I mean, I had some real problems with what was happening inside the administration. I mean, again, he was not obviously aware of these things. He couldn't get it done. His team wasn't serving him well, and they weren't serving the American public well. And that was certainly my belief, and still my belief, and I think it's being confirmed now.
Let's talk about him for just a second on a couple of points, because just timeline-wise, you're looking at hydroxychloroquine. The world sort of discovers hydroxychloroquine the moment he mentions it in a very strange press conference where he basically says, hey, I'm hearing about this drug, hydroxychloroquine.
This has been prescribed for many years for people to combat malaria, which was a big problem, and it's very effective. It's a strong drug.
And like Fauci, just all it throws him off the stage, gets to the microphone and says, I don't agree with that at all. We have to do a lot of, randomized control studies, something he doesn't care about unless it seems like he's trying to bury something.
But the information that you're referring to specifically is anecdotal. It was not done in a controlled clinical trial, so you really can't make any definitive statement about it.
And you have to understand the power of Fauci in that moment. By the way, I was in the Senate lunch where Fauci was wrapped around Trump's neck, saying, he got a very effective spokesman and bipartisan support, okay? And he was never able to unwrap him.
Yeah.
But, Fauci says something like that. I mean, the guy controls hundreds of billions of dollars worth of grants. And so anybody that ever wants to get a grant from Fauci and company, they just toe the line. So he says hydroxychloroquine's off the board, hydroxychloroquine's off the board.
That moment, how long had the conversations how long had you been aware of hydroxychloroquine before Donald Trump mentioned it?
I hadn't. Well,
was it all at the same time there?
Probably
Were you
about
all
the same
talking
time.
to the
I
same
think I
people?
probably heard of that. I think it was a state senator in Michigan that got cured by hydroxychloroquine.
Okay.
I think that's what President Trump was referring to. Again,
Right.
I'm trying to think back to these things and maybe imperfect memory.
Yeah.
But again, I always said this in all of my hearings, why not give it a shot?
Right.
I mean, I knew hydroxychloroquine was what they give senators when you go to Africa to prevent malaria. I knew that I have some family
Which means
members
it's safe.
with
People just take
rheumatoid
it as
arthritis and
preventative. So, what's the big
lupus.
deal?
Yeah, so a lot of people, I knew people that took hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
And said, well, why not give it a shot?
Not a lot of stories of them dying from. You never heard about hydroxychloroquine death.
No, so all of a sudden they came with this QT factor and that type of thing. So again, they scaremongered on that. They poisoned it. They sabotaged hydroxychloroquine.
I read Scott Atlas's book, which said a lot of what I already believed to be the case. I've talked to some other inside doctors and things. From your perspective, there seemed to be this rift between Donald Trump and Tony Fauci. We would see it on camera, but how was it discussed amongst, your peers around here? What's going on? Why is the head of this COVID response team under the president was there an awareness that they seemed to be opposed or in conflict?
Well, again, I was at the Senate lunch when, this is after a number of press conferences, and Trump obviously wasn't a doctor, and was saying things that opened him up to criticism, and a helpful suggestion from the conference. We've got a perfect person that's respected on both sides of the aisle to be your main spokesman here, Anthony Fauci. And so I'm saying, I remember the moment when Fauci was wrapped around Trump's neck and he could never unwrap it.
Right.
Okay.
So he made that choice early on. This is going to be my guy.
But I remember being on one of those conference calls. And this is when they were discussing shutdowns. And I said, Dr. Fauci, are you considering the human toll and the economic devastation of these shutdowns? Are you considering that at all as you're recommending this? And it, kind of like Francis Collins, just cavalier, it's not my department.
Right.
It's like,
but then
you're not even considering it.
Here's the point: then somebody from that department has to be a part of this decision making.
Well, I mean,
why didn't that happen? This is crazy.
That's where you have to say, the buck stops with the president. But you understand, you know the support that Fauci still has in the media, and you understand the power of the media.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, President of the United States, U.S. Senator, it's difficult to buck the media. That's why I say I hold them largely responsible for this. If we had an honest media, I don't think this would have happened. I don't think our response to COVID would have been as awful as it was.
I agree. What do you think would have happened had Trump fired Fauci? Does he even have the ability? I don't even know. Is he legally allowed to fire? Do you know about that?
Yeah, I think so. Somebody that senior, I think he'd probably be able to fire. Fauci might be able to sue him, but these individuals do.
We'll give him a severance package.
Serve at the will of the president.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to speculate, but you just know this firestorm would have been in the press.
Yeah.
I understand why. I'm sure all of his advisors were saying, "You can't touch this guy." And I'm sure Fauci viewed himself as untouchable too.
Do you think
he strikes me as a somewhat arrogant individual?
If you are trying to get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science.
Do you think Trump knows that Fauci was against him? I mean, I don't know. Are we making this all up?
I would bet that Trump was not a real Fauci fan very early on. Probably regretted he followed that advice probably the minute after he followed it.
What happens to Fauci? You think Fauci sticks around for
not if Republicans take control? He's out of here like a bat out of hell.
Yeah.
He's not going to stick around for our oversight.
Well,
I'd like him to.
Can you call him in once he can still be dragged in,
We have
right?
some reasonably strong subpoena power. We have more investigatory authority than let's say an inspector general does.
Okay. Well, I pray I get to see that. So then also at the around this time you said lockdowns. You didn't want to see the country being locked down. My question is, are we hearing at the same time you're hearing it, or are there conversations going on inside of the Capitol, inside the Senate, inside the Congress that are like, look, we're starting to look at the possibility we might have to lock this country down? Was that a whisper? Were there meetings on it, or were you finding out about that approach at the same time the American public?
I would say I would give the Trump administration a great deal of credit. I mean, the entire team. They were holding, many conference calls with members on a bipartisan basis. Okay, they were all. I mean, the team was. I mean, Trump would be on some of these, so they were keeping us informed.
Yeah.
Just about every other day, we had another conference call with whoever. So again, maybe they were discussing this up front, but generally it was always concurrent with what was in the news, what they were saying in those press conferences.
Yeah.
We weren't hearing a whole lot more. Oftentimes is giving people an opportunity to ask agency heads, how can we get PPE for this hospital or whatever. Right. So again, it was a very collaborative time. I mean, there really wasn't much partisanship. People were really trying to help people out and kind of working with this administration. We realized we had a national emergency here. So from that standpoint, again, I don't agree with what they recommended in the end, but the process was very inclusive and is very bipartisan. Okay. I'd call it nonpartisan.
And it's not like the government's working and then they only leak it out to the public when we're ready to handle it. It's pretty. Things happen right up front.
It was all happening in real time.
Okay.
Listen, there was a lot we didn't know.
Right.
That's why I've really not been, and I certainly wasn't critical back then of people that were governors. They were in a really tough spot, having to make really difficult decisions with imperfect information. I'm not going to criticize them for that.
Right.
It's like this. We were all flying blind, and people were trying to do the best they absolutely could. Now, in hindsight, you can say, "Well, that was pretty stupid." Okay, but certainly at the time, I was giving people an awful lot of slack.
But at what point? I mean, you have a hearing with Johnny Eanes. You start bringing in professionals that are starting to really lay out ways to crunch the data. What is the point at which you felt like it's time to stop giving people slack? This information's out there. I'm reading it in sources I can find it. When do we let go of,
Well, so when I start seeing the sabotage of hydroxychloroquine, when I start seeing that, when all of a sudden I can't get a hold of the CEO of Novartis.
Okay.
It's not a question, how can we get enough? It's just like, why is this being sabotaged? I mean, I can't explain that. Again, I kept trying. President Trump kept trying. I remember one of those Senate calls where literally Trump's on the phone. And I'm saying, Mr. President, we've got to break this logjam in hydroxychloroquine. We have to make it available. The FDA has created this emergency use authorization that it made it way more restrictive. I remember President Trump on the phone with all these senators saying, "Mark, take care of Johnson's request." Couldn't do it. Just couldn't get it done. I did hook up with Dr. Lee Valit, because what I needed a group of doctors. We still need doctors. We need a lot more doctors. I understand the fear. I really do. I understand why they don't come forward. but we need large numbers of doctors coming forward and saying this isn't right.
Yeah.
And we got Dr. Vliet through her AAPS, was that American Association of Physicians and Surgeons.
Yeah.
I think we got 1,300 to 1,700 signatures on a letter that she helped me write to the president about, you have got to make hydroxychloroquine available. So that connected me to that group of doctors. And that's really, then I started getting in all these email chains. I'm sure you're, okay, so that's the moment where I got connected to.
Where are we at now? What time?
I wrote that letter probably in April of 2020, end of April.
You're on this.
Maybe
I mean, looking back, I mean, you were really, I mean, you're in there, you know, the voice for the people, truly, on something that we should, those of us that we're on the high wire, we're talking about hydroxychloroquine. This is fantastic. We're looking at the studies done by DDA, right? So we're out there trying to get this push, thinking, what is going on inside, you know?
Again, it was making no, when things don't make sense, I try and make sense of them, okay?
Right.
So I'm doing those battles, but this is where I get connected in this global network of what I always say, eminently qualified doctors and medical researchers that had a completely different take on this. You know, I'm sure they're the same names, okay? And you start getting all these articles, some of them actually pretty easy to read and interpret. Some of the stuff was definitely over my head, okay? But I get connected to them. But I also realize at that point in time, just like senators, just like, they're like herding cats. It was not an easy task. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you get a large enough group of doctors to come forward to offer a different narrative? After the election, I finally had that group of doctors assembled, and I remember having a Zoom call with probably about 24 different doctors, and I had to decide who do I want to have as my witnesses. Not a real easy decision to make.
Right.
It just wasn't, okay? Fortunately, I chose Dr. Peter McCulloch, Harvey Risch, George Freed.
Okay.
Those are my three witnesses at the first first hearing on early treatment.
Okay.
And of course, the Democrats chose Dr. Ashish Jha. Tail end of the hearing, kind of the mic drop moment where I finally, because he's just ripping these guys, you know, and I'm going, well, Dr. Jha, you know, how many COVID patients have you treated?
Obviously, I'm not perfect, but I try to use science as well as compassion to guide me.
We appreciate that. Have you treated any COVID patients?
I have not, sir.
Okay.
Right.
I found, my wife showed me an article later on, I think it's like January or February. This is after he could finally get a vaccine. He finally left his apartment. Wow. He'd been holed up in his apartment the entire time during COVID.
Oh my God.
I mean, again, personally, if I'm going to try and seek a second opinion or even first opinion on a medical condition, I'm going to go to a doctor who has the courage to treat patients.
Right.
Okay? Not some guy who's holed up but now he's our COVID czar.
Right.
Unbelievable. He also, by the way, wrote, after that hearing, he's the one that wrote the nasty op-ed that the New York Times headlined, "The Snake Oil Salesman of the Senate," calling Dr. McCulloch, Harvey Risch, George Freed.
The guys were actually out there.
Again,
right.
People that had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients, he's calling them snake oil salesmen.
Wow.
It's pretty grotesque. So anyway, we were widely savaged for that hearing. My ranking member was not cooperative. I can't remember if
was anybody. Is there? I mean, did you wake? I mean, in that process, that hearing, does anyone in this building say, "Hey, man, good job. I really found that interesting"?
No, because I would go to Republican Senate lunches and go, guys. I mean, the solution's here. I mean, early treatment. I mean, it's not just one. It's not just hydroxychloroquine. There's literally a cornucopia of drugs, and I didn't realize how large a cornucopia that was. But this is a multi-drug protocol, and it's working. I mean, the solution, the end of the pandemic is here. Now, this is before the vaccines have been approved. And crickets. It's still crickets.
Why? Why is that? Why is that the case?
I mean,
again, we are all sitting here in the public being told government's on overtime here trying to figure out solutions.
Because of the human tendency, and this is society-wide, people don't like to admit they're wrong. You know, people in America that got vaxxed, they don't want to admit that maybe we did something that might hurt my long-term health. So that's certainly part of what's happening here. But again, we were savaged for it. We were vilified, ridiculed. You know, snake oil salesman in the Senate didn't deter me. Right. I came right back. Pierre Corey had prepared his manuscript on ivermectin. This is I think December 8th. You know, so the first hearing was in November. A month later, I hold it with Pierre Corey. He comes in. It was interesting. You know, they've all been in my office here, and he was just, you know, pandemic's over. We got this. I mean, I've turned my manuscript over to Hugh. It's irrefutable. You know,
he really believed.
You get me in front of the NIH and stuff. They're going to see evidence. By the way, the evidence was powerful enough to have the NIH go from negative to neutral on ivermectin.
Yeah.
You know, so it did have an impact, just not the pandemic ending impact that Pierre was hoping for. What was interesting about that hearing is this is the second hearing on early treatment, and Gary Peters was not happy with it, my ranking member, and he just basically accused Pierre Corey as being a political hack.
Last month, this committee held a hearing that was billed as a review of early outpatient treatments for coronavirus. Instead of hearing from expert witnesses about scientific developments in the coronavirus treatments or how we can improve the pandemic response, the committee was used as a platform to attack science and promote discredited treatments.
Pierre Corey is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat,
right?
And he wasn't real happy being treated by a Democrat senator like that. And
right.
and that's really it was the fact that I think Gary Peters got under his skin as a New Yorker, that he had that 8, 9, 10-minute opening statement, which got 1 million views before it got pulled from the internet.
Right.
I just want to start out, I didn't think I'd have to say this, but I want to register my offense at the ranking member's opening statement. I was discredited as a politician. I am a physician and a man of science. I have done nothing but commit myself to scientific truth and the care of patients. And to hear that I'm here because of a political angle, I am not a politician, I'm a physician. I want to start out by saying that I'm not speaking as an individual, I'm speaking on behalf of the organization that I'm a part of. We are a group of some of the most highly published physicians in the world. We have near 2,000 peer-reviewed publications among us, led by Professor Paul Marik, who's our intellectual leader. We came together early on in the pandemic, and all we have sought is to review the world's literature on every facet of this disease, trying to develop effective protocols.
In the same time, before we get into, the vaccine comes along, before that, let's talk lockdowns for a second, because this boggles my mind. I mean, and I want to say this, I grew up a progressive, liberal, loudmouth, Boulder, Colorado. I'm an environmentalist, so that's my background. So I don't, now I say I'm politically marooned. So, but when I ask this question, my thinking on, Republican Party, conservative, certainly Tea Party is, business first, man. You know what I mean? Like the right to own a business, to go out, the American dream, that is the idea of a lockdown does not seem like anything. It's like the greatest strike against everything the Republican Party would believe in, I would think. I mean, and how did they go along with it? How does the party?
Fauci. Literally, it was the power of Fauci.
Now, the power that they had no say in the matter, or that they just bowed down to anything he had to say?
I think they almost were forced to.
By
by public pressure, by the media. The media was so in the tank for Fauci that Trump couldn't contradict him. Even though there was never a pandemic plan that ever talked about shutdowns like that.
Right.
And they just threw it all out the window. Again, I can't explain it. It makes no sense to me.
Do you think is it because you're watching Trump get slaughtered on these issues, not wanting to lock down? Is it he's sort of the point guy and everybody else goes, well, if the president can't carry this message, I'm certainly not going to be the one? Is that, or
I think it's just,
or was there distancing from Trump? Is it, I don't want to be connected to that?
No,
approach?
I think my colleagues look at me as roadkill.
Yeah.
They've seen what's happened to me. They see what happens to Trump. It's not necessarily distancing. It's just like, I don't think I want to do that.
I'm going to go take another route.
I'm not going to step in front of that tire.
Right.
That's not pretty. No, again, as you go back to the motivation, people want to get reelected. Being that far on the wrong side of the press is not helpful in terms of getting reelected.
Right. So then, all right, so lockdown happens. I always think, to me, a pivotal moment really is the moment I remember Donald Trump's in the Rose Garden and basically said a lot of things that we knew to be true on the high wire at that point.
I don't want the cure to be worse than the problem itself. You can destroy a country this way by closing it down. We're substantially less than 1%. And when they came to my office, don't forget, they were saying 3%, 4%, 5%. There's a very big difference. No, we have to put our country back to work. I'd love to have it open by Easter. Okay, I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now. I would love to have that. It's such an important day for other reasons, but I'll make it an important day for this too. I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
I remember thinking, wow, he just said it all. He's right. Everything we're looking at, this is a death rate below 1%. You know, it is destroying jobs, lives, economy. I mean, all the work you'd seen of America sort of regaining its balance, I thought, in the world. And now all of a sudden we're collapsing. Kids can't go to school. And then it was like the press. That to me was the moment. I felt like the moment where we kind of lost that, you know, gun-slinging rogue, I'll do whatever it takes president. To me, he got so attacked and so ripped apart in that moment that I don't feel like I ever saw the same Donald Trump after that. That it was just like, if I can't beat him, join him. Then it became about the vaccine, and then it became about, you know, well, there would have been 20 million deaths had I not, you know, closed the, you know, the borders down and things. Like the whole languaging seemed to just shift there, where he like gave up on trying to open us and said, well, what am I going to do?
If I wouldn't have done what I did, we would have had 3 or 4 million lives lost.
Well,
Was there a shift like that,
No,
or am I just imagining that?
I can relate to him from that standpoint when I wrote the op-ed for USA Today's arguing against shutdowns. I mean, I was savagely attacked. Well, you want to kill people? No,
Right.
no, I don't want to kill people. I don't want to. I'm not hard, and you know, not happy to see people die.
Right.
It's just that this is not the solution. This is the cure is going to be worse than the disease. And by the way, it didn't work.
No.
I mean that's what. And again, this was kind of, I think, feeds into my theory here that nobody wants to admit they're wrong. Nobody.
Right.
Because it's obvious that this didn't work. I mean,
Yeah.
This ought to be big time news going, hey, time out, guys. The shutdowns, the masks, the vaccine, none of it worked.
Right.
I mean, if you believe CDC's figures and don't completely believe them, 1 million Americans dead, you call that a success?
Right.
$6 trillion of money printed that we don't have, 9.1% inflation, what we've done to our children. I always say, you know, it's like, I mean, I never thought masks would work. I mean, I think they might be marginally beneficial. But there's one group of Americans we knew they would never work on. It's kids. You ever seen kids wear masks?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
You know, and we're still imposing it on people. We want to reimpose it.
Yeah.
Again, it's their way of doubling down on failure so they never have to admit they were wrong.
What I can't believe, in all honesty, is the way Tony Fauci, all the way through it, we have the highest death rates in the world. I was like, and you're in charge of how we're handling this. Like, how is it this guy still has a job when, you know, you're saying we've been hit harder than the entire world? We've been hit. We have the best hospital systems in the world. We have the best doctors in the world. If we're having higher death rates, then doesn't it come down to the guy that's calling the shots here?
Yeah, but nobody wants to admit they were wrong and putting Fauci in charge and listening to him. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's about the only explanation I have in terms of how insane our response has been and continues to be. I mean, it's insane. You take a look at these vaccine mandates. I mean, it's the year anniversary of Joe Biden saying, you take this vaccine, you're not going to get infected.
You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Same day you get sick.
Right.
On the 1 year anniversary.
Hey, folks, guess you heard this morning I tested positive for COVID. But I've been double vaccinated, double boosted.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm double vaxxed plus double boosted. But did reduce the severity of the disease. I'd like to see the data on that, by the way. Because I had COVID in, I think, end of September, early October 2020, completely asymptomatic. The only reason I knew it is because I get tested all the time because I'm around people. Got a whopping level of antibodies, so now I had it. 40 to 50% of Americans, or probably worldwide, were asymptomatic.
That was a whole argument.
How do you explain that?
That was the whole argument. The entire reason we were locking down is it's the asymptomatic care, those people that aren't having any effects. When they were saying it is 95% effective at reducing symptoms, when they finally even admitted that in the trials, that's not really what they said to the public, but it's what we were reading in the trials. It's like, How do you reduce symptoms below 0? We're talking about the body. Your big issue with this is that people aren't having symptoms. So they're having less symptoms than the 0 symptoms. And, I had the same thing. I got COVID last Christmas over break, and it was like 4 hours. Like, I took a bunch of vitamin C and then it went away. I tested. Yep, got all the antibodies. So I could argue also, man, sure glad I didn't get that vaccine, because I kicked that thing out right away, really low symptoms. I mean, so everyone can make that argument that does well, and those that don't, let's not hear.
So what I've always asked people is have an open mind, and please admit there's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much I don't know, so much you don't know. So would you have a little bit of modesty in terms of admitting there's a lot that we don't know about this? But every day that goes by, we know more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's so much we don't know about this. So so I'll complete this story here. So Pierre Corey, that's December.
Okay.
Then we approved the vaccines. And so I'm aware of the fact that CDC, FDA had been touting their VAERS system. I've seen the 8-hour, not the whole 8 hour, but I've seen the salient parts of that. They had a teleconference in, I don't know, it must have been probably September, October, November of 2020, just talking about how, we've got these systems, VAERS best, all these safety surveillance systems.
Celebrating VAERS.
No, oh, yes.
Like, we've got this great system. We're going to be able to handle this emergency use. They'll capture all this.
Yeah, they're pushing it. They're saying, this is, so if we approve these things, there was actually a comment saying, our safety surveillance system, if we have people that have, let's say, 2 days lost work because of adverse event of the vaccine, I mean, we're going to have a CDC representative on the phone calling them, checking this thing out. It was total bull.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I start watching the VAERS.
I know that because we'd already been through the VAERS stuff, and every time we talk to Fauci, every time you talk to anybody in authority, like, can't trust VAERS, underreported. It's just a passive reporting system,
but before,
not capable of capturing.
Before they got the EUA, they were touting it. So
that's amazing. I'm saying
they
were fighting it back in 2017 when I was dealing with other vaccine issues. They were already lying to you because we'd already heard the story. They're
already pulling out all the stops to get this thing done. So they're touting their safety surveillance system. So I start watching them, and the deaths start mounting. Now, I'd already researched, for example, the swine flu back in 1976. Okay. 400 to 500 cases of Guillain-Barré disease, and 2 or 3 dozen deaths.
Yeah,
shut that thing down. Boom, that thing's over. It looks too risky, and we're getting a few hundred deaths, over 1,000, 2,000. Finally, we had a meeting with a bunch of Republican senators and Francis Collins that I got invited to. And of course, I'm the skunk in the room. Trust me, everybody else is there all patting themselves on the back. The vaccine and the testing, we got that out, and just what a fabulous job we've done to respond. I'm kind of raised my hand and said, "Well, Dr. Collins, are you monitoring the VAERS system at all?" Now, this is after they had shut down temporarily the J&J vaccine because there were 6 deaths
pause that they took.
that were attributed to the vaccine of child age-bearing women. It's over 3,000 deaths worldwide on VAERS, and by my calculations, 40% of those are occurring on day 0, 1, or 2. And it goes into the song and dance. Well, VAERS doesn't prove causation. It's voluntarily. Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, but okay, it doesn't prove causation. But again, this is your system. 40% of 3,000 deaths. I think the number is 1,230 deaths are occurring on the day they get vaxxed or within 2 days.
Right.
Doesn't that concern you? And literally his answer to me was, Senator, people die.
Wow.
He was so arrogant on the phone. He's just so arrogant. And so I'm kind of going in that meeting with senators, and this is the end of April of 2021 now, and kind of loaded for bear. And again, the same level of arrogance. And I just couldn't believe, I thought I pretty well, I've got to get his attention with this. I mean, 3,000 deaths. I mean, I knew the swine flu stats. I mean, what are you guys doing about this?
Right.
And that's when I realized nothing. They were in a complete state of denial. But because I'd made that noise, because I was talking about VAERS on media hits, and I was getting vilified for it. I was getting censored. I've got my famous little chart that I've developed that compares ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, flu vaccine, which, for your viewers, ivermectin over like 26 years has on average 11 deaths per year. Hydroxychloroquine somewhere around 75 to 78. The normal flu vaccine is also under 80.
Yeah.
We're up to 29,000 or more deaths on COVID. It's like,
right.
And
Same
the
system.
And the FDA is trying
them.
they're
Right.
trying to scare you about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Come on, y'all, you're not a cow. These are the drugs they're scaremongering the American public over.
Yeah.
So again, I've got that information. I'm expecting him to say something, but because I'm putting that out there, I'm putting it on Twitter and it's getting censored or whatever, I get a call from a former Green Bay Packer, Ken Ruckers. He was a Hall of Fame lineman, and his wife Cheryl was vaccine injured, and they were connected to a group of about 2,000 people on Facebook of people vaccine injured. And he said, I'm seeing what you're doing. I'm just calling to see if I can get help somewhere. I mean, these people, all they want is to be seen, heard, and believed. That's all, because they can't get treatment. Nobody's acknowledging what they're suffering from. And some of them are suffering with these internal vibrations so severe they're committing suicide. I mean, can you help us out in some way, shape, or form? So, well, Ken, again, I don't have much power, but because I'm a U.S. senator, I can garner attention. I mean, I can make myself a target.
Yeah.
If I hold an event in Wisconsin, particularly if you come out,
right,
we can probably get some TV cameras there, and at least they can tell their story. So yeah, I hope springs eternal. We held this event in June in Milwaukee, and we probably had, I don't know, at least a dozen, maybe more TV cameras show up, and we had Bree Dressen, we had Maddie DeGarry and Stephanie, we had Cheryl, we had a couple other individuals. Two of these, by the way, Maddie was in the Pfizer trial for children.
Right.
Bree Dressen was in AstraZeneca. Has to lay down most of the time during because she gets such severe headaches. So we had the event, and the 5 individuals told their stories. Yeah, I was hoping maybe some members of the media would show some measure of human compassion and interview these people and and put that on the news so people would be aware of the fact that, it's not 100% safe. There are people being injured by it.
What I want to ask, Maddie volunteered for the Pfizer trial. Why? Why aren't they researching her to figure out why this happened? So other people don't have to go through this.
We've been robbed of our cognitive abilities, our physical abilities. We cannot work. We cannot care for our families or our children or ourselves. We are struggling to make it through each day, abandoned by our healthcare teams. We are the collateral damage of the pandemic.
We've been at battle against the pandemic, and there's been damage. Seems like and that's why I reached out to Senator Johnson. Seems reasonable to say, let's help these people.
Now the news media have started asking Ken Ruckers, well, this is just about winning a lawsuit. Want to make some money off a lawsuit? And of course, then they start ripping into me. In Wisconsin, rather than the news media talking about the vaccine injured, about a dozen Wisconsin newspapers had my picture above the fold with the headline, "So fundamentally dangerous." So that's,
Wow.
no good deed goes unpunished.
Right.
So again, I don't back down.
Well, I guess my question is this. Obviously you heard some of these stories, Bree's story and Maddie's prior to bringing them on this panel, but as you sat there and listened to this, you listened to it, how did that affect you? And then, how did it just affect you as a person?
First of all,
because those are powerful
I had no doubt that they were vaccine injured.
Yeah.
I just had no doubt. I was convinced. Again, I've got a very open mind about these things. Okay, wasn't anti-vax, got all these vaccines, that kind of stuff, but. But then you start, again, I react to evidence. So, I maybe sometimes go, well, I wish I would have known that sooner. Why didn't you check into that sooner? So no, I just had nothing but sympathy and compassion for those folks. And I was proud that I at least gave them a platform to tell their story. And I was appalled by the treatment of the media.
Yeah.
So it's, right now it is definitely me against the media.
Yeah.
It's all of us against the media. It's all of us against the COVID cartel. The administration, the health agencies, big pharma, the mainstream legacy media, and big tech social media giants. That is the COVID cartel. They are the ones I keep telling people that they can't afford to admit they're wrong at this point. The body count is so high.
I agree.
They can't afford to be proven wrong, but the problem is they've got the power to make it almost impossible to prove them wrong. I mean, just walking over here, I was thinking of the phrase, it's the victors that write the history.
Right.
And they intend to be the victors.
Yeah, well, so do I. So we.
Well, I think you and I both.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know that.
But you know better than anybody what we're up against.
I do. But you did something that was, I think, a game changer. A game changer, at least for those people that have been focused on vaccine injury for not just 2 years or 5 years, some 10 years, 20 years back. You put together world-renowned doctors. I was at that event. We had a rally here in DC, and then it was the second opinion hearing that you had. And I remember I sat there and thought, this is what, the work that I've done for the last 4 or 5 years, this is what everyone I've met has dreamed would finally happen. Real doctors, all believing in the medical system, none of them anti-vaccine, stepping up, talking about natural immunity, talking about the importance of it, talking about the dangers they're seeing with these vaccines, how poorly it had been made, how poorly it had been tested. I mean, I think for all of us that, have been at this for some time, we thought this has got to be it. I mean, this is huge now.
I came back after, after the vilification. I had an event here in DC, which set up the second opinion event. But we had with Bree again some of the vaccine news that we had in Milwaukee, but we had more. And then we had medical experts, people like Peter Doshi. So that was sort of the bridge to the January 24th event. We had the room for 5 hours. I didn't know they would use up. 5 hours is a pretty good length of time. Just like my first hearing where I had a couple dozen doctors on, I'm trying to figure out, who do I pick?
Yeah.
It's a hard decision. There's some really good people on that. I'd do the same thing here, but worse. I had to organize it because they've all got their ideas. Even naming it. I'm the ones. No, we're going to call this COVID-19 a second opinion. The way we're going to organize this is we're going to go back to Dr. McCulloch's 4 pillars. Who's going to speak to preventing the spread or limiting the spread? Who's going to do early treatment? Who's going to be doing hospital treatment, then who's going to do vaccines. My big regret of that is we just never had we barely scratched the surface. I had 1 page, single space, I had questions I wanted to get to, under the 4 categories. Barely scratched the surface, and we just never got into describing vaccines. So right now what I'm trying to develop, and working with people like Dr. Malone and others, is another event that is going to focus on the vaccines.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that literally millions of people did watch that 5-hour event. Yeah. We condensed it down to 38 minutes. I think I've got to say this too. Paul Merrick was, what a.
I want to bring that up too. So yeah, tell me about that.
When he's, he kind of had hospital care, because again, Emily qualified critical care. He's the
leading, most published ICU doctor in the history of the planet Earth.
And so he's describing how in this hospital, his death rate, again, now he's treating COVID patients in critical care. Not early the way they should be treated.
Worst case scenario.
Because people can't get early treatment. So now he's taking care of them, and his death rate is half of what his colleagues are. So you hear that, go, well, they probably pinned a medal on him and found out what he was doing. No. What they did is they took away his medications. They didn't allow him to use ivermectin. They even took away vitamin C. And so in his testimony, it's just so powerful. He said, so they took away all my tools, but they left me with my 7 patients. They tied my hands, so all I could do is sit by and watch my patients die. I was there in person at that. To me, it's actually more impactful to see the video of it.
As a clinician, for the first time in my entire career, I could not be a doctor. I could not treat patients the way I had to be to treat patients. I had 7 COVID patients, including a 31-year-old woman. I was not allowed to treat these people. I had to stand by idly. Watching these people die.
To me, that is just it just epitomizes what our response to COVID was. The Faucis of the world, the Collins of the world, the Birx, the health agencies, they took away the tools of doctors. Remember, it was doctors who had practiced medicine saved my daughter's life. It's the reason I got into this awful business. They took away the tools of the doctors who had the courage and compassion to actually treat COVID patients. And we've just sat back and watched how many hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens die.
I believe that constitutes a crime against humanity. It certainly, in my mind, is no different than Tuskegee. I mean, Tuskegee experiment, you have these African Americans with syphilis, you have penicillin, you know it works, and instead you stand by, deny that it exists, and just watch these people die. This is shocking. The heads of our government health departments did that to their own people.
They just turned a blind eye to it. I mean, one of the reasons I'm so convinced of early treatment is I know these doctors that have the courage and compassion to treat. So I have a lot of people I've referred them. And then I talk to them. You know, people, I mean, just can't breathe, and literally within hours they can.
Right.
Okay? Way too many people to say it's just placebo effect, okay?
Right.
So again, I'm thoroughly convinced this multi-drug protocol works. I got to quick tell you a story how absurd this has gone, though. At the very start of Omicron, I do telephone town halls. We call out to 80,000 Wisconsinites at a crack, and somewhere 5, 10, 15,000 people are on the call. So I'm just trying to warn people, listen, it's a deadly disease. Don't ever take anything I've said, this is a deadly disease,
right.
Okay? Take it seriously. And whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed, I mean, there are things you can do to protect yourself. I mean, I was talking to Fauci like he's the Grinch. Takes, Saul's World Hunger tells no one. Takes vitamin D, tells no one.
Right.
Okay? So I'm saying, listen, as I'm talking to these doctors, they seem to think that people that are getting really sick with COVID often are vitamin D deficient. So you can supplement yourself. There's vitamin C. Gargle.
Right.
You can reduce the viral load. So, and I've got Democrat trolls on my telephone town hall. Within 10 minutes, my comms team were being called by national news saying, is it true that Senator said that Listerine will replace the vaccine? They went so far as to go knocking on the governor of New Hampshire's door. What do you think about this wacky Republican senator that's saying that Listerine will replace the vaccine? Of course, I never said that.
Right.
I put up with a week of that kind of ridicule and vilification for just what's the worst thing that can happen? Fresher breath? I was quoting a study on this, okay?
Wow.
But that's the length they would go to try and destroy anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it make you think of the media? How big a part or how bad? We went through a presidency with Donald Trump where, just fake news really called out the media. When we think of problems in this country, and I think we're really struggling right now. We talked beforehand, we could probably do a whole other conversation about how devastated this nation is in just a few short years, empty shelves, gas prices through the roof, inflation, it's bad. It's not the country I remember as future, certainly not the one I grew up in.
I hold the media largely responsible.
Yeah.
I first hold the radical leftists who took over our university systems in the 60s responsible. I mean, they're the ones that have been cranking out teachers that indoctrinate our youth, lawyers that become activist judges, but then journalists that aren't journalists are advocates. They're also radical leftists. Again, these people, these major networks, they don't do interviews with me. No. They argue with me. Well, they're not journalists, they're advocates.
Right.
And so that's why I say they're part of the COVID cartel. And they have every bit as vested interest in not being proven wrong now. Because again, I believe these people do have blood on their hands, okay? Hundreds of thousands of people are dead in America that didn't have to die. I am 100% thoroughly convinced of that.
Yeah.
If the medical establishment had an open mind toward early treatment and listened to people like Corey and McCulloch and just tried it, give their patients who are begging them. I mean,
it's a doctor-patient relationship.
Begging them.
Right.
Begging them.
Yeah.
Okay? Just wouldn't do it. I can't explain it. It makes me profoundly sad
I want to talk about another colleague out there that you have. I mean, so we've covered a lot of what you've been doing there. From our perspective, you've been the biggest voice, for the vaccine injured, for the discussion about VAERS, what's going on there, the deaths that are going on, the early treatments. I mean, you've covered that whole gamut. But there's also this conversation of where this virus came from. And Rand Paul really seems to have sort of carried that torch. The gain of function investigations really grilling into Fauci. First of all, are you with him on that? I mean, is that something that
Yeah. The only reason I'm not grilling Fauci is he never comes before my committees. If he came before my committees, I would be asking him some tough questions because I've written him, Del, I'm up to 43 oversight letters on this.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, I'm one. We need to find out. The problem is we pretty well sabotage our ability to get in there early when there might be evidence. So I mean, the Chinese have a long time to cover things up.
So the lab, right?
I mean, to me, I've just always assumed it's been a lab leak. Very early on, I was talking to computational biologists talking about the furon cleavage site and all that kind of stuff, and they were absolutely certain it just wouldn't occur in nature and whatever. It's important to know, but from my standpoint, I'm more focused on what we can do to prevent harm. So I mean, every step of the way, if you take a look at what I've done, I've advocated for no shutdowns because I want to prevent harm. I've advocated for early treatment because I want, because we may never have a vaccine. Then we got it. Then I'm looking at vaccine injuries. It's like, well, use a little caution here. Let's not be forcing this on pregnant women. And you see more vaccine harm. You go, well, so let's not force it on kids. Well, then they agree to kids. Well, let's at least not do toddlers, and they approved it for toddlers. But the good news, and I think this is where people like you and our group can take a fair amount of credit. We're vilified for it, but I'm happy to take credit for the fact that a very small percentage of American parents are having their toddlers get vaccinated.
And, so also we're seeing a huge breakaway in confidence in the vaccine program in general because of it. And this is something I warned the CDC about very early on.
Please do the CDC a favor, do this nation a favor, and lead by erring on the side of caution for the citizens and not the pharmaceutical industry, and pull Johnson & Johnson immediately, or we could seriously see the destruction of confidence in all vaccine programs and science as we know it.
Too late.
It's too late. Really.
So I think it's in my mind, it's destroyed. We need to rebuild these agencies. We need an agency like that.
I agree.
We do. We need somebody to overlook the safety of the American public, but they're not the agency to do it.
Right.
They've shown themselves corrupt, captured by big pharma. Are these pharma just a puppeteer? I mean, what we need to do.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
on a macro basis, because right now, these doctors that I revere are being crushed at the bottom of the treatment pyramid. Yeah. They need to be at the top of it. Yeah. We need to reestablish doctors so they can practice medicine, utilize their skill, and put these agencies back on their lane. CDC is all about gathering information and disseminating accurate information, not doctoring it. But they've willfully not gathered information because they didn't want to know. Mm-hmm. FDA is about safety and protecting and probably being overcautious. The reason I passed a right to try bill is I want the FDA to be overcautious. But I want patients to have the freedom to say, okay,
right.
I'm
dying here anyway.
I understand you haven't done full approval,
right?
But let me have access to it.
Yeah.
Okay, and don't penalize the drug manufacturers if that person dies because they're going to die anyway. Okay, right. So I think there's some common sense things to do, but let me look right in the camera and make my appeal to doctors. Please. Because if you're a doctor and you are awakened to what's happened, if you know that it's wrong and it's not right, don't sit by the sidelines anymore. Don't let just Peter McCulloch and Dr. Malone and Pierre Corey and all these courageous doctors who've stepped forward to warn the public. They need help. We literally need thousands of doctors who are aware of the problem to join together. There is safety in numbers, and be honest and truthful with the American public. I'm begging doctors, I'm begging nurses to come forward, join together as one massive group, and put an end to this insanity and help restore yourselves to the position that I think you all thought you'd be in going through medical school and taking that Hippocratic oath. Being loyal first to your patients and being the one to call the shots when it comes to how you care for your patients. I'm begging doctors, you have to step up the plate.
Are you feeling any shift, whether it's in your constituents back in Wisconsin, people walking down the street, or maybe even some of your colleagues here? Is anyone coming to you and saying, you called that out and you said, you had issues with the vaccine and its effectiveness, and here we are?
I wish I could say yes, other than the people that already had their eyes opened. I mean, listen, people are opening up their eyes.
Yeah.
But I mean, the powers to be, they're certainly not admitting it. I was just in a Senate lunch, and they were singing the praise about the vaccines again, saying it saved 20 million lives. There's a study out there that the vaccine saved 20 million lives. So, well, how convenient. I'd love to see that study. So, no, they will continue. People voted for this stuff. We spent billions on it. They were recommending it, whether it's doctors, whether it's members of Congress. They don't want to admit that something they recommended their constituents or their patients might have harmed them or killed them. So the state of denial is going to be almost impossible to break. Okay, if you've been involved in this and if you've been pushing this, you are not going to want to see evidence. You're not going to want to admit it. So no, we've got unbelievable resistance to getting the truth out there, to awakening more people.
When you're speaking to your colleagues and it sounds like they just have no interest, is it really because they're not interested, or is it that, one of the things that I've said as I've traveled the country before COVID, I said, pharma is the most powerful lobby in Washington. It's outspending oil and gas 2-1. And I've been saying to audiences for years,
the pharmaceutical industry is now the most powerful lobby in Washington, outspending oil and gas 2-1.
What do you think pharma's buying with that? If oil and gas has got us fighting wars in the Middle East, pharma's spending twice that for your senators, for your congressmen, for your president. That money is having an effect. Is this pharma lobby? Is this why we can't seem to penetrate or get our representatives to listen to us or read a VAERS report or understand what's going on?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's donations. There's limits to what any company can give you, and a U.S. Senate race now is costing tens of millions of dollars. So it's not even, it's not even a blip on the radar in terms of what you need to fund a campaign. I think in terms of what Big Pharma's done is they've captured the agencies, and that's their real power. And it's, I think, I have not done a study. I'd like to look at this, but it'd be real interesting to see, the exchange of personnel over time.
Yeah.
I won't name names, but let's face it, there are people that have been FDA commissioners.
What Gottlieb just did. I'll name the name. Straight out of government, straight back into
that's at the top level. What do you think's happening at the lower level?
Right.
Back and forth, okay?
Yeah.
So I just think it's just very, very probably probably smart investments, regulatory capture, but also coming in and educating, providing your viewpoint to staff and to members, that kind of thing. And listen, when I first started running in 2010, I said, to me it's absurd to be vilifying like big oil and big pharma. So what am I the only guy that likes to see gas stations and be able to fill up my car at a whim? Or am I the only guy that wants a life-saving new drug? So again, I don't harbor ill will toward big business. I think they have to make money. Drug companies have to, so they can invest. Mm-hmm. But my eyes have certainly been opened in terms of the capture of the agencies and the corruption of that, the corruption of all the grant money. Yeah. And a guy like Fauci to all these institutions, the medical journals. So I just think there is overall corruption throughout our federal health agencies, the medical establishment, the medical journals. Science, not just as it relates to medical science, but government funding corrupts these things.
Wow, so there's power over these institutions than it is finance.
That's what I think it is.
Interesting. Not to make this a party issue, but under the current circumstance, you have Democrats, House and Senate, if there was a shift, it seems to me, I don't care what party, But whatever party's not pushing this baloney right now, it seems to me the investigations of Fauci, the investigation of Deborah Birx, based on everything she's already admitting in her book. I lied to the president. I lied to the people. We made up social distancing ideas. We told everybody the vaccine would work, and I think was very well grilled by some of your colleagues saying, it's a wishful thinking, hopeful thing. So here you are saying you want to stop misinformation. You're the greatest purveyors of misinformation. Is there any sense in the Republican Party right now, coming into an election coming up here, that there may be a real, power to running on the fact that we're going to investigate Fauci, we're going to look into gain of function, we're going to look into this vaccine that never delivered what you were promised? Is there any sense that there's some power there?
I'll ask you, do you hear candidates talking about this?
Not as much as I'd like.
No. Listen, there's some individuals. I have no doubt that Rand will come and he'll focus on gain of function and the origin of COVID. I think people like Jim Jordan, there are a couple of House members will do this.
Yeah.
I expect resistance. I'll just be honest with you. If I do survive and we take over the majority, I'd be the chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Now, I've laid my foundation. We just had a hearing on Bureau of Prisons. I took the opportunity to talk about the importance of government oversight, legislative oversight, and I asked whistleblowers to come forward.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, 43 oversight letters. I've laid the foundation for the investigations I'm going to want to do on this subject. But is it going to be popular? No, because again, people don't want to be proven wrong. I mean,
right.
The people at lunch who were saying, "Hey, the vaccines saved 20 million people." You think again? I've shown them the VAERS data. I've given them the charts. It's to crickets.
Well, okay,
that's what we're up against.
But yet, here you are, in politics longer than your wife wanted you to be.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's had its own conversations. We won't get into
Listen,
that.
She's a page. She knows why I'm doing
but
this.
You
she's
must
she's fully supportive.
You must have something inside of you that believes there's a chance. That there's something that can move you.
Yeah, I'll never give up hope.
Yeah.
I'll never give up hope.
So what is the way forward? Is it more the people?
It's truth. The truth is the way. It just is. It's the truth. It has its own power. I have to believe it has its own power. I do try and counsel the people that are in this struggle with me. Only talk about what you know. Try not to marginalize yourself. I try not to use certain terms. Because I think it's important that those of us who are really fighting this battle don't make bigger targets of ourselves than we already are, and we're big targets. They want to destroy us. There's no doubt in my mind they want to destroy us. I have personal experience in terms of how they go about doing it. They're very good at it.
Well, I think I just want to say this because, first of all, it is an absolute honor to get to sit here with you in person. As a journalist, and that's the only reason I'm in this, is because I felt like my job was simply to ask questions and to try and uncover the truth where I could find it. And we felt for the beginning of this, just what is happening inside the Capitol, what's happening inside our government, and what is really still is the greatest nation in the world and the greatest experiment that's ever taken place under complete, seizure right now. It's so scary to see what's going on in this country when we think about what we believed about this country as I grew up and read my history books. But I want to say that knowing you're in here, and Rand Paul, and a few other voices in here, gives me hope. And I want to say this, that I don't have to run for election, but I get to watch the ratings. I get to see, the amount of people that are taking this information. We get to see what happens when we put your videos out there and your hearings out there. We're watching the millions of people, which when this began was thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. I've never been under some, belief that a politician can change the world. We know how messed up the system is, but I believe that the pitchforks and the torches are outside the gates of this government right now, and it's a growing cacophony of people that just want the truth. And so I can say this, that what you have to look at is not only do we only have about 2.5% of the infants that have been vaccinated, I think the biggest number that we have to look at, and how much value has the work you've done had, is the fact that I think still only 30% of the people that are, up for the booster shot have gotten it. CDC is recommending it. That means to me 70% of those who believed in this product that don't want to hear the things that we've got to say, well, they know something. And they're going against now the CDC's recommendation. We have a growing body of people that have reached a place, and I think it's the majority now. Now, whether it's a voting majority or it's able to make change, I think that politicians that don't recognize what you've recognized about the truth, I think they're going to be shocked to see what happens over the next couple of years. And if you keep doing what you're doing, I believe we can bring the people to change this country.
Well, listen, you're a hero to me.
Feelings mutual.
What you've done, you provided people the truth, and you've been careful in people you've had. I hesitate to paraphrase a wonderful quote, but just got this from the doctor groups. It's Margaret Mead had a pretty good quote, something to the effect of, never doubt that a few people can save the world, because in reality, that's all that's ever saved it. So again, America is something rare and precious. Our founders never could have envisioned a beast this large. The whole point of this thing, I've got the 10th Amendment up on my wall here. It's government should be close to the governed, not at this faraway place in Washington, D.C. So we are seeing the impact of an out of control government that takes on more and more power. And of course, as government grows, our freedoms necessarily recede, and that's what we're witnessing here.
Yes.
And what's unfortunate is too many of our fellow citizens have willingly, over the decades, given up their freedom for a false sense of security. And I don't think there's ever been a greater example of that as during the pandemic. You just have to believe that the truth will have an impact, and we'll just keep doing everything we can to get it out there. So
Yes,
thank you for all you've done.
Thank you for all you've done. You are a hero, and we need more like you in this crazy town here in Washington, D.C., but it's an honor. So
It's a real pleasure. My honor too.
All right.